Hey guys, my name is Neel and welcome to Neel Workshop Zone. So in this episode we will be learning about flowcharts. So in the previous episodes we talked a lot about data structures and algorithms. So if you haven't checked it out, then recommend checking out those episodes because flowchart is really related to data structures and algorithms, especially algorithms. So without any further ado, let's talk about flowcharts. So you might have heard this term flowcharts a lot. So what is a flowchart? Well, a flowchart, you can say, is a diagrammatic representation of the workflow or a process. Or to put it in simpler terms or terms related to algorithm, a flowchart is basically the diagrammatic representation of an algorithm. It basically tells us how a work should be done. So you might be thinking to yourself, okay, flowchart sounds cool and it is cool to look at because I'm pretty sure everyone knows how a flowchart looks. But what is the point of a flowchart and what is the point of discussing it right now and in such an important pace? Well, the reason is because flowcharts has a lot of important reasons why we use this. Well, the first reason is because this helps us to differentiate the important parts from the not that important parts, because when you're writing code there are a lot of parts that are the main parts, like the main conditions, the main code that you need to write, and then there are some filler code that just needs to be written so that the code can work. So this flowchart helps us to understand what the code is actually about and what we're trying to achieve, and it also helps us to ensure better communication when you're working on a group project regarding algorithms or some sort of code. It helps others to understand what you're working on without the code looking like just really jumbled, And there is still a lot more advantages, and we'll talk about those advantages and disadvantages and types of flowcharts in the next episode. But for now, let's talk about how do we even write or describe a flowchart. So without any further ado, let's talk about it. So where do we start? Okay, so flowcharts could be started in a simple way. So this oval shaped are known as terminals or terminators. And no, I'm not talking about the film. So this terminals or terminators, as you can call it, is basically an oval shaped figure that basically tells us where the code begins and where the code ends. So let me just write a simple code. It's just an example. So this is a start and an end. And if I draw an arrow mark, which is called the flow, this represents the code that we have written here, which is nothing, but this tells us about the code that you can write. This is a simple flowchart. This is working. I'll just bring my duster real quick. Okay, so this is basically terminals. Now let's talk about data. So data is a parallelogram shaped object, you can say, which tells us about the code that needs to be written. So for example, if I write something like take a is equal to 1 and print a, and then write this. This is another flowchart. So it tells us that we need to take a value of a is equal to 1 and print a. So this is a simple flowchart regarding data. Now let's write a rectangle one, and let us also write rectangular ones. So this is what you can call it as process. This is still data. So what is a process? Well, process basically tells us about the main concept of our code. So if you write something important like let a comma b comma c be the data types of the code, this basically tells us about the main important concept of the code that is being written. So this is what we call the process. So now that we have talked about the process, let us talk about decision. So decision is a rhombus shaped figure that tells us about conditions like if, loops, etc. So if you're working on a loop, like if a is equals to 1, then print a. If a is not equal to 1, then print nothing or null. And you could just join this and write a circle. So this is basically process, and this is basically the rhombus shaped figure that we just talked about, or also which we call as decision. So this is decision, and this is data, and this is terminals, and this, where is it? This is the flow, and finally, and this is the on-page reference. So what is this on-page reference? Well, sometimes the code exceeds the limit of the code that needs to be written, so a lot of times we just continue to code in another project or in another page if you're working on a paper, and this on-page reference basically tells us that the code does start somewhere else. So in another page of code you can just write something like print B. So this tells us that the code is still being continued, So yeah, this is how you write a basic flowchart. You have the terminals, process, decision, flow, data, on-page references, and yeah, that is basically how we write a flowchart. So hope you enjoyed this short video. In the next episode we'll talk about a really small topic. We'll talk about the advantages, disadvantages, and the different types of flowcharts, which isn't a lot. But yeah, hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, don't forget to like, share, subscribe, hit the notification bell so you don't miss out any new videos. And that's it folks, I'll see you in the next one. Bye bye.